Valparaiso and Vina del Mar. After an expedition to Antarctica, I had 2 days to spend in Santiago, Chile, before returning home. Since I had seen much of Santiago prior to the expedition, I decided to take a day trip to Valparaiso and Vina del Mar. I had heard that both were charming locations to visit. I booked a full-day excursion through TripAdvisor, and it was run by Stamps Tour. I thought I had booked a bus tour, but it was actually an oversized 15-passenger van. Fortunately, as a solo traveler, I was able to get a good seat toward the front of the van. I was one of the last to be picked up, so we immediately headed toward Valparaiso. About an hour out of town, we stopped at Café Milieu in Curacave. Evidently, Milieu translates to place of gold. It was a small cafe where you could purchase refreshments and pastries. We stayed about 30 minutes and then drove through the Casablanca Valley vineyards. I found it interesting that they had windmills for temperature control of the vineyards. We arrived in Vina del Mar about an hour later. Our first stop was in front of the Funk Museum, where there was a large Maui statue from Easter Island. Although the statue was noteworthy, I thought it was a bit of an odd place to stop for as long as we did, because the only thing to see was the statue. We were encouraged to purchase souvenirs from the vendors nearby, so I wondered if that was why we stayed so long. After that, we headed to the infamous flower clock. Once everyone had satisfied the picture taking, we headed for the fish market by the sea. After coming back from pristine Antarctica, I actually found this part of the trip disturbing. The sea lions looked pathetic and somewhat sickly, and had become a tourist attraction, with people getting way too close to them in order to get a picture. I understood that the fish market fed the sea lions, so it all just seemed a little strange. It was dusty and pungent with the smell of fish, so I was happy to leave the spot quickly. After that, we drove along the coast of Valparaiso. We disembarked and began a walking tour, which was my favorite part of this trip. We started with a steep funicular ride to a delightful street full of vendors, shops, and restaurants. The perspective out to the sea from this vantage point was quite lovely and revealed the charm of Valparaiso. Like Santiago, Valparaiso is also riddled with graffiti and adorned with murals. There really were some marvelous murals to appreciate as we walked through the streets. We arrived at a terraced garden. Then we headed down the stairs so we could admire the garden on the way down. We then headed toward Cerro Alegre, which to me was the most charming area of Valparaiso. The streets lead to beautiful views beyond, and the architecture of the buildings gave it a quaint charm. Once again, you have to notice the interesting murals that line the streets as you walk. We were brought to this lookout point to get a view of the entire city down to the sea. We then walked to this restaurant, Inquilino, where we had beautiful sea views from our tables. I nabbed a seat on the balcony and enjoyed some excellent food with the views. We stayed at the restaurant about 90 minutes before heading through the streets. We then headed down some colorful stairs. Evidently, there are hundreds of painted stairs like this in Valparaiso, which begs for a photograph. Shortly afterward, our van picked us up and we drove to Casas del Bosque, a winery in Casablanca, for wine tasting and exploration. It really was a beautiful winery, with picture-perfect settings and views of the vineyards. Every time I turned a corner, there was another pretty place to sit and enjoy your surroundings. This seemed to be a place that held all sorts of special events, as they had numerous rooms for gatherings, as well as an upscale restaurant. We were eventually ushered into a brief 15-minute wine tasting of both white and red wine. We were then allowed to explore some more, and of course encouraged to purchase from the wine shop. That concluded the tour to Valparaiso and Vina del Mar. We were then driven back to our respective hotels in Santiago. So my overall impression of the day trip? Well, I was a little underwhelmed by the excursion, but perhaps that was inevitable after coming back from Antarctica. The contrast between the somewhat neglected, graffiti-filled streets of Valparaiso and the pristine landscape of Antarctica was extreme. The highlights for me were the Cerro Alegre area of Valparaiso and the Casablanca Winery. Neither Valparaiso or Vina del Mar are places I will probably visit again, but I'm glad I took the day trip and extended my knowledge of the Chilean coastal cities. If you'd like to follow more of my senior and solo travel journeys, please subscribe. Cheers!